Chaplain Kevin Weaver, and welcome to A Grief Observed. Those of you watching have most likely experienced the grief in your life, the death of a loved one. As you've likely discovered, most of us are not prepared for the journey of grief. Grief can be lonely, devastating, and sometimes frightening. Ultimately, rather than attempting to walk around grief, we must walk through it. Someone once said, at times grief is like looking for deep answers in a dark hole. However true that may be, we don't have to walk alone. Joining me today to share his journey through grief is Kirk Grugel.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kirk. You know, 9 years ago, we met each other, and we didn't even know it.
I didn't know it, correct.
We didn't even know it. And there was a holiday tragedy that occurred in December 2005.
It's been 9 years this December.
9 years ago.
You do the math.
Yeah, little Annie.
Annie. Mm-hmm.
And so we want to talk about her, kind of bring back up the situation. And because I know Kirk's with CASA, and so he works with foster families and foster care, and of course that's how he came to know little Annie. And correct. I wanted to talk to him about how he managed his grief, you know, being kind of outside in a sense, not a family member, but certainly very involved and concerned.
Well, absolutely. The closeness for me about Annie was, in fact, that Annie was a child in the system, although that wasn't public knowledge at the time. And Annie was tragically killed, as the community would remember, by a dog. She was attacked by a dog and ultimately died as a result of those injuries. I had known Annie at that point. She was 4. I had known Annie probably 3 years, most of her life at that point, and had been with her through her journey in the foster care system. And so I did get to know Annie very well. I knew Annie's foster parents very well, and I knew Annie's parents very well. And when this tragedy happened, as you and I have talked about before, Kevin, this wasn't just a tragedy for those of us who knew Annie. This wasn't just grief for those who knew Annie. This was a variety of grief that impacted the whole community. Because this was so tragic and so sudden and so horrific, what happened to Annie, the community really rallied around. And so this was a community grief. But personally for me and for the CASA that was serving Annie and for those of us in the system who worked for Annie all those years with her while she was in the system, it hit a little closer to home. Because, you know, certainly in my field of work, working in the child welfare system, I experienced a lot of vicarious trauma and vicarious grief every day. And people ask me all the time, how do you see this and do this every day, Kirk? My answer is, I need to know what happened to bring that to my attention. Right. I choose to look that way. I choose to look forward. How do we fix it? How do we make it better? So that's how I deal with my daily traumas and my daily grief, is looking forward rather than backward. As far as Annie and the community rallying around what happened and the tragedy of what happened, and dealing with my volunteer who was assigned to serve Annie, there was a community service for Annie, a funeral held on December 20th, 9 years ago this month. And as that process closed and that chapter was closed as far as her service and her funeral, that didn't end it for those of us, certainly who knew Annie and cared for Annie. So what I wound up doing for those of us in the profession and those of us who work with Annie, as you can see in this beautiful flower arrangement that's been put together, there is a butterfly in the front of this arrangement. That butterfly has been in my office for 9 years because it's my remembrance of Annie, and I look at it every, when I see it and it catches my attention, it certainly reminds me of Annie. That was everybody's one remembering item about Annie. Annie was all about butterflies. She had been a butterfly for Halloween, and she loved butterflies. It was the one memory that we all shared of Annie. So I had gone and got a large piece of flagstone and had it carved and chiseled out in the shape of a butterfly. And then I had Annie engraved on it in big bold letters. Just Annie is all it said. So we had a service with Reverend Ball from St. John's in this little cemetery, and released some balloons for Annie, certainly to let her go. But also, everybody was given this butterfly as a remembrance of Annie, and we put her headstone in the cemetery on the property where Annie had lived for a couple of years. So that was our way as a community to deal with that closure, as a community of those who served Annie, I should say. Certainly that grief was far-reaching in the community, as you well know. As somebody who didn't know Annie, you wrote a song for Annie.
Yeah.
I think we'll be hearing that today.
We will, in just a few minutes.
In just a few minutes, and I look forward to hearing that. So that was your way of dealing and bringing Annie back to life for you, was by writing this song and remembering Annie through the song that you wrote. So this headstone, if you will, that I had made for Annie, actually the foster parents have since moved to Lake Havasu, excuse me, and that headstone went with them. And actually it's a centerpiece in their garden now in their home in Lake Havasu. So when we started talking about doing this today, I found this butterfly in my office, and it was put into this flower arrangement. The community, as far as their grief, those who didn't know Annie, and even hearing other people's story of grief, I grieve for them. That's part of being human, as you and I have talked about before, is, I hear them and I feel for them. And the community of Show Low and the surrounding of the White Mountains, this was, headline news. It was national news, actually, when this happened to Annie. And the community needed their way to give closure as well. And so I know a lot of donations came in. I know her family was helped immensely by the community. And that is the community's way of dealing with grief, is they want to do something to help. So I think that it was accomplished.
Yeah, and that is so true. The community always wants to rally. And I think, and the reason why I bring you here today is because all these years later, I think it's important that we remember we have a responsibility to each other. To bring it up, as hurtful as it might be, if nothing else, it brings people together, and here a friendship has begun because of a very tragic event that happened so many years ago. And, and I value that. And I think we as community members, especially in a small town, we value those things that bring us together. So there is tremendous value that comes through grief and through these tragic losses that hit us, well, as you said, day by day by day. And then, of course, an instance such as this that happened 9 years ago, we'll really never forget.
Never forget. My people, my volunteers, you said I was the CASA coordinator. So I am the director of a program that has 21 volunteers who serve these children in foster care. And so in talking about and thinking about grief in our conversation today, it got me to thinking of different kinds of grief. It's not just death that causes us grief.
Right.
My people, my volunteers get very involved in the lives of these children, and when we finally come to permanence for those children, hopefully that's reunification with the parents. That's our ultimate goal usually, or whether that's adoption by a family. My CASAs need closure for that. And so I have a phone, I call it the bat phone. It's on 24/7. I believe we need to process that. My pleading to my volunteers is, leave this at your front door. Please don't bring this in your house with you. And I understand that's very difficult for these people. They're caring, loving individuals, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So call me and process this with me and put this on my shoulders. I get paid to do this. I'll take that for right now until I retire, and then I'll sigh a big sigh of relief when I don't have to take that on anymore. But in the meantime, they need a way of release, and they need a way of processing that, as does the community as a whole when these tragedies happen. So, that's kind of my role. I process with my people. I let them talk, I let them spew, and I take it and hopefully counsel them in the same way that you hopefully counsel your people.
I agree with your approach, Kirk. I think one of the most important things that we can bring to one another is the realization that we don't have to travel this journey alone.
We don't.
Much of it, of course, is just we're destined to take some of the steps by ourselves, but to rely on others to, well, as I often say, is to share our story, to share that burden of grief.
Kevin, you and I had lunch last week, and one of the things we talked about at lunch was this is Christmas, this is the holiday season, and there's people out there I know who are going through this alone, and I don't want them to go through this alone. I want them to call you. I want them to call not a professional.
Yes.
I want them to find. We talked about community, and how as we were growing up, the hub of our existence back in the late 50s, and I'm a little bit older than you, a lot older than you.
A little bit.
Our hub of existence back then was our church.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the church is the right place for everybody. It's the right place for a lot of us. But the very word church translates to community.
That's it.
I'm saying to people who are going through and experiencing grief now, even if it's fresh, if it's old, find somebody. Go to dinner at the VFW. Go to dinner at the senior center. Find a group that you can feel comfortable with and expose yourself to, and let them surround you in a cocoon.
You're so right. Reach out. Don't sit and withdraw. That's really the worst thing that a person can do, is just to withdraw within themselves. We absolutely must reach out, make contact.
Absolutely.
We have to do that. And we will get through the other side. We just will. Look at all these years later. We still can talk about the devastating impact, but I think there's more of a smile on our face. There are friendships that have been formed. There are relationships that are growing. I think you said at lunch to me the other day, this community loved Annie. We didn't even know her.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
It's easy to love a child, and I often compare that. I have no children. I knew I would never have any children. I invested heavily in my nieces and nephews, knowing they were my babies.
Yeah.
And I often joke with my family now that, okay, y'all thought I would never have any children, and now I have 150 of them.
Ha, ha, ha.
Because I look at every child in foster care in this county as, I don't want to say as mine, but I'm certainly a part of their lives. And I watch over them. I watch what happens in their lives. And one of our very first conversations many months ago was, you had spoken at a meeting I was at, and I approached you saying, listen, Chaplain, we have just had a young man in Navajo County that I was working with commit suicide just a couple of days prior. And I did not know how to process that.
And you reached out.
I reached out.
Kirk, they're telling me our time is just about up.
Okay.
I'm so
It's
sorry.
all good.
Yeah, it is all good.
All good.
You know what? We're going to be back in just a couple minutes. That song, there's a song that was written for Little Annie. It's called Little Annie, My Butterfly.
Nice.
Good friend of mine, Gail Lynn, is here. She's going to be performing it. We'll be right back.